What's happening? What's happening? What's happening? Blues people, good people, academics, laypersons, folklore studies students, professors, ethnomusicologists, our sister, brother, and cousin, disciplines and field, and everyone else in the melanated nation. Uh, this is episode 2 for 2025, the African American Folklorist of the Month. And I'm sitting with a good brother I met in Tulsa, which was one of my most memorable American Folklore Society conferences. Dr. Ray Summerville. He is an alumnus of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University and the University of Missouri Columbia, where he earned a PhD in English with the concentration in folklore, oral traditions, and culture. Also, let me just be clear: at North Carolina A&T, he earned a BA, BSN, Masters in English and African American literature, which is something that I want to get into in our conversation because Black literature and folklore has been practiced since before we were, as Black folk, considered conducting folklore studies work. Um, his research interests include African American history, African American literature, post-colonial studies, paremiology, phraseology, hip hop, blues, and other folklore genres. He currently teaches at Fayetteville State University in North Carolina, and I hope I said that right. He has a book that I definitely want to discuss, which is In Proverb Masters, Shaping the Civil Rights Movement. And the foreword was written by someone who I consider a mentor. I hope she thinks I'm her mentee, Dr. Patricia Turner. And then he wrote a chapter in a book that I'm quite interested in called Gun Law. So good, folk. Let's welcome the good brother, Dr. Raymond Summerville. What's happening, sir?
Hey, what's going on? Thank you for having me.
Man, thank you for being here. There's quite a few things that I would like to discuss. I think what I want to start with, particularly with your degree and interest in African American literature, and a lot of the folks I was able to speak to, whether it was on the air or on the side, come out of literature or English, Black, white, Asian, everyone, no particular ethnicity or nationality. Everyone in our field and discipline not everyone, but a good portion of the people who say they came into our field by default is what I'm getting to, was either in a literary program, an English program, or something like this. So how were you introduced to folklore studies?
It was quite an interesting journey. I was at A&T, finishing my MA in English and African American Lit, and I was applying to some grad schools for the PhD, and so I was accepted to a couple. I chose the University of Missouri Columbia, and as a lit student, they accepted me, and so I was looking at their website, and I was just checking out some of the different titles of some of the work of the scholars that were there, and that's where I discovered folklore. I hadn't really heard of it or considered it as a discipline before that, because it was just a part of African American lit. That's the way I thought about folklore. But that's where I learned at University of Missouri that it was a discipline of its own.
Mm-hmm. So now, when you mentioned the University of Missouri, um, and you have cohorts that come out of this under the guise or under the tutelage, if you will, of a particular and very prominent Black folklorist. Uh, would you share some of those folk and this prominent scholars that we all revere?
Well, the first was Dr. Prahlad, Dr. Anand Prahlad, and he has done a lot of research in paremiology, and so proverb studies. I was looking at a lot of his books, um, and that just let me know, well, it deals with African American literature, but it's a little bit different, and so that's what attracted me to it, and so Prahlad's work is great. Dr. Elaine Lawless, she's done a lot of research and writing in folklore, uh, African American folklore, and also ethnology. She's also an established ethnologist, and so her writings have done a lot to get me acclimated to the field. Also, um,
So well, let me ask you this, because you and I want to get to your story. So, but in regards to the field, and one of the things that I like to try to do with this program for the laypersons, the community scholars, or and those in the in academics, um, have an understanding. And one of the understandings is you made a clear difference between African American lit and folklore studies, how it's looked at, right? Could you give us an example or some detail of the difference and similarity?
the differences and similarities. Well, I guess I'll start with the similarities. When you're reading African American lit, you're always going to find African American folklore, and so one of the first examples I can think of is the Frederick Douglass autobiography. It's um, in most high school textbooks, and of course the Norton Anthology of African American Lit. And so he talks about things like griots on the plantation and how they inspired him to seek freedom, after consulting with the griots, the witch doctors, also that, give him this rabbit's foot that's supposed to make him invisible or invincible. Um, and you come across things like that in literature. And Charles Chestnut was another one of the first ones that I was introduced to as a lit student. That he just used a lot of folklore. I didn't know what a goofer was. I never heard the term. I always use the term spell or witchcraft, but the goofer grapevine, and all of the rest of his short stories kind of showed me the significance of you know African and African American traditions in literature, um, and so African American literature is filled with Black traditions, and also blues as well. When you look at the works of Ralph Ellison and Ralph Ellison and some others, you see that you really can't separate Black folklore from African American literature. And then there's also the differences. The main difference is that when you look at folklore from a disciplinary standpoint, folklorists are more concerned about traditions and isolating specific traditions. It's not and studying them in depth, from a historical standpoint and also from a cultural standpoint. What do they mean? How do they function in society? Why do people continue to embrace and practice these traditions? But when you look at literature, you're going to see it scattered throughout the literary work, and the work might not be focused specifically on the tradition. You just know that it's interwoven there, and it's a part of it. And so that's the main difference.
So well, let me ask you, and then I want to get to um, actually your book, but I wanted to ask you, because listening to what you're saying and thinking about your work, I think of Shirley Moody Turner. I think of Black folklore and the politics of racial representation in the early days of the Hampton Institute and things of this nature. And you've mentioned Charles Chestnut and even in our era, uh, Dr. Ebony Bailey. I think all of in Dr. Todd Lawrence, all of you um, who are in the space of literature and applied folklorists. Um, how much, when it comes to just Black folklore and the study documentation and the things like that, do we use memory, right, from
Mm.
experience? And is that with is I know, I believe it's accepted now, but in the early days, was that accepted? Did that separate uh Black scholarship from non-Black scholarship?
Experience is definitely a part of it. Um, I was always encouraged, especially in the folklore uh, program at University of Missouri Columbia, is to by a non-prolog is to use your experience in your writing. If you have experience in something, even if African American literature, you don't want to you want to use it. That experience is valuable. It's valuable experience that other people don't have. And so I think that's really important. It's really important for Black folklorists to write. And of course, we Black folklorists can't write enough. Because a lot of our, and this, a lot of our a lot of African American traditions are not have been written about and documented and um, preserved by people that aren't African American. The overwhelming majority of it. When you think about things like blues music, but when you do have people that speak, when you do talk about traditions from one's own perspective, you know, um, it adds another element to it. It definitely adds another element to it that is that can't be replicated. All the scholarship that I've encountered on in blues and things of that nature is certainly legitimate, but it's just unfortunate that the overwhelming majority of it is not really written by people that are African American.
Hmm.
But there are some, and I think we need a lot more African American people to write about blues music and other traditions. And so I think that's important. I think that's important, and it doesn't delegitimize anyone else's study, but there are definitely a lot of elements that you capture through experience.
And I guess knowing the language. So I think that's a good place to start with this particular book that you have that I'm quite interested in, which is in Proverb Masters, Shaping the Civil Rights Movement. Uh, could you give us a summary and then the inspiration of the book?
Well, Proverb Masters, Shaping the Civil Rights Movement, it covers several important activists that use proverbs profusely in their work, um, and it covers. It starts at the entire long civil rights movement, and so the early 1900s up to the modern era. And so there are several people that use proverbs to get their serious and important social and political messages to the rest of the world. And proverbs, sayings, and proverbial expressions were their vehicles for for transmitting these important messages. And so the book covers, it starts with Ida B. Wells Barnett, Ida B. Wells, Charles Chestnut, um, Asa Philip Randolph, Bob Dylan, Septima Poinsett Clark, Malcolm X, and Stokely Carmichael. And so those aren't the only activists that use proverbs profusely, but they are some of the most important people. And so I talk about their proverb use, what it meant to the people, what the proverbs, sayings, and proverbial expressions meant to them, what their messages meant to other people, and how those messages are perceived today.
Well, there's an inside joke that it's no longer inside because I'm sharing it now. That my son and I have when we're all watching different films or reading different books together, and different cultures we refer to as okay that anything they say is a proverb or anything they say, like this these type of words of wisdom, even if it's not a proverb or words of wisdom, we kind of make this joke because I think we're identifying in these different cultures, proverbs are significant. So I bring that up to ask you, not just for these prominent figures, nor just for the moment that they were utilizing this, but just for the Black experience. Is there a significance with or a deep connection with Black American folk and proverbs?
I believe there definitely is a deep connection. Um, Proverbs have definitely been important throughout African American history. They use these proverbs throughout the civil rights movement. A lot of the proverbs that are used, you find, come from biblical texts, comes from scripture, um, and it's just been one of the important things that Black people have depended on in times of need. I mean, you find a lot of sayings, proverbs, and sayings come from actual the freedom songs that they use in the civil rights movement, that came from the old Negro spirituals that were even sang on plantations. And so some of the sayings come from those kind of sacred places. Um, and so it is it's definitely an integral part of African American culture and tradition.
What 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 made you want to look at that, and particularly for that movement?
Well, I was introduced to the idea by Professor Wolfgang Meter at the University of Vermont, and his work. One of the first books that I was introduced by him through Dr. Anand Prahlad, who also does proverb study, was his book on Barack Obama and Barack Obama's use of proverbs and sayings. And from that point, I discovered some of his other work. He's written about um, Martin Luther King Jr., um, Senator John Lewis, um, and Frederick Douglass, Abraham Lincoln, and several others. And so looking at his work, he really started it all in terms of connecting Proverbs studies to social justice movements. Um, and so you could say, well, Dr. Anand Prahlad, he did a book on reggae proverbs. And of course, reggae is a it began as a music of protest and revolution. And so his work connects to that as well. But then as far as the civil rights movement, protest movements in America, I would say Dr. Meter's work introduced me to the idea um, and got me started in that direction. Um,
So, well, because one of the things that revere about your work is it encompasses musical expression, text expression, and then everything that kind of formulates the two, right? So when you look at blues, when you look at field hollers, black spirituals, and oral histories, right? Um, are you quantifying? Are you looking at performances? Are you looking at meanings? What 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 are you looking to uh, kind of express from it or present? Is there anything you're grappling with as you're looking at these things?
Well, when I'm looking at Proverbs, I like to do textual studies the most. When I look for things that people have written. Well, one study that I did dealing with music was Bob Dylan, and he was heavily involved in the civil rights movement. He sang at the March on Washington. And so he was probably the one person that I looked to his lyrics the most. He's done a lot of interviews, but I was really focusing on his song lyrics. And he has a website with, hundreds of songs, and the lyrics are readily available for anybody that wants to read them. And so I'm reading all of his lyrics and I'm looking for proverbs, and there's hundreds of them. So he was the first person that I actually wrote about in connecting the proverbs to social justice movement. But most of the time, I'm looking for people that have written, and like I said, African Americans, they can't write enough. We can't write enough, and so, but everybody hasn't written autobiographies, but the ones that have, autobiographies and memoirs are definitely have a wealth of oral tradition in them. And so I'm looking through there. I'm looking for proverbs, proverbial expressions, sayings, and I use their words, and also their words, and also historical background information to contextualize the proverbs that I find. And so contextualizing them and understanding what they meant at the time that they were shared, is usually what I grapple with the most. But um, I find that when people do use proverbs, for the most part, they're using them in their writing to make really serious points. And so that's the I guess the reward for doing the contextual the work, trying to contextualize them, is you get to understand their work at a different level, when you just isolate the sayings that they're using.
I dig it. You said something there that I have to see if we can go a little further with, because what I'm finding and have been finding is a lot of us, and when I say us, I don't even just mean folklore, black, but just people in general, um, unintentionally read something that could be 20, 30, 50, 100 years ago and apply today's understanding to then, right? So you said that when you read these things, you try to contextualize what they meant at the time, right?
Yeah,
So here's a loaded question. I'm going to let you just take it from there, and then I'll ask some specific questions about that.
definitely. What they meant at the time that they were used, what was going on, what serious important point were they trying to make, and oftentimes you see that they use proverbs and sayings to impart serious lessons, or people were using them to impart a serious lesson on them. And I guess the gift is that, when they're usually life lessons that that are always important, that are still important, that are kind of universal principles that people should follow, almost like religion. Even if it's just a saying, and this saying is just important in this person's family, then you look at the saying and you think about it and what they meant, and it's just really important. It's the sound of it. There's this
Mhm.
different quality to the statement that makes it a memorable proverb, and the person that is using it is going to use it over and over. And it's this important universal principle that people can't really argue against, just a regular a saying. And that's what I find most interesting. It's really a gift when you can isolate those things. And if like I said, if the person didn't feel compelled to write about their life, then of course maybe this particular saying wouldn't become a proverb. Maybe it wouldn't be remembered. But that's another reason why the writing is so important.
So what you said reminds me of the premise of something James Cone wrote in Black Theology, and how the conditions of Black America are related to the conditions of the Bible, and that's how they processed and kind of I guess applied these different things. So universally and isolated tribally, right? Did you find that some of these proverbs, the meanings kind of was based on the conditions of the folk using it at the time? And have you found any common thread, like the meaning still stays the same today?
Yes, definitely. They are proverbs that they use. I find that proverbs during the civil rights movement, when you look at proverb use of people that were heavily involved in the civil rights movement, they're using proverbs and sayings that can get them through those tough and difficult times. And so that's what makes it makes it so eye-opening, from a historical standpoint. These are the things that got them through those times. And so you have to think, when you're contextualizing, what were those times actually like? I don't have a time machine, I don't think anyone does, but I can look at their words and the things that they repeated, and get a sense of what those times may have been like. And everybody knows they held hands and sang a lot during the civil rights movement. After every meeting, when you look at things like organizations like SNCC, SL, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and CORE, and some of the others, it was just a regular event. It wasn't a real surprise. It wasn't anything special. They just sang before, and after, and sometimes during every meeting. And that's what they had to do for health of mind, body, and soul, and that's what they needed. Is what they needed, and it got them through those tough and difficult times. Nowadays, I haven't been to a meeting unless it was a regular church service. That's the only time I've experienced that, but that's how tumultuous and those times were. I mean, we look at all the assassinations that occurred within just a few years of one another. That's what they needed to keep going, even in the face of danger. And so the songs were important, but the sayings were literally equally important.
And so in recent years, right? Because we can almost say the last 25 years. Is it the last 25? You know what? I'll shave it down a bit. That might be too large, but since Michael Brown to now, right? Do you see a lot of resemblance from that era and the usage of proverbs, whether it's through song or chanting and things of this nature?
There were a lot of songs. Yes, songs. Now, when you see the current protests, they still you see a lot of groups singing as well. They're singing, and in addition to that, you're seeing a lot of music artists making songs and addressing these serious problems in their work as well. Uh, Kendrick Lamar's song "We're Gonna Be All Right," became sort of like another anthem, during the turmoil that unfolded in Ferguson, and some other places. And so it's still remembered. It's still remembered. It's still a part of the Black tradition. um, and I think it always will be.
So, and I want to get to gun law, but you made this point a couple of times, and I really appreciate this. That yes, there are Black African American folklorists and academics writing, but we need more. One, and you did give a reason why we need more, but I would like you to expound upon that. And then if you have a suggestion how we can galvanize or encourage that to happen.
I think it's really important. We definitely do need a lot more African American folklorists writing about African American traditions. And so there are some. There are quite a few. But when you look at the overwhelming majority of the research and historical documentation on African American life, culture, and traditions, the overwhelming majority of that is written by people that aren't African American. And we're grateful to have that stuff. All of that information is crucial. It gives us a starting point. The work of Alan Lomax, the Lomaxes, their work is definitely critical. Paul Oliver, and many others. But we have there are a lot of Black blues artists, and I think it would definitely add another dimension to have the practitioners write about their work from their own point of view. So we need a lot more Black scholars working on writing about Black traditions, and there's so many new Black traditions today that have not been recorded. And so we have to think about what's there already, and we have to build on that by writing about what's here now today. And I think it would take a lot of it takes a lot more involvement to even attempt to unearth the traditions that we practice every day, and preserve those and write about those, and to educate other people about those traditions, and so it's definitely an area that needs far more attention.
I dig it. So now, gun law. What inspired the project? What inspired you to be a participant in this project, and what was it that you were looking at?
Gun lore was inspired. Let's see, by an essay that I read by Bernard Harcourt. Bernard Harcourt, he's a law professor, a political scientist, Bernard Harcourt. And so his essay, he wrote about he did field research at a correctional institute, and he wrote an essay about it. It started out as an essay, and then he expanded it to a book. But he's interviewing these youth, and he's trying to figure out how they view guns. What are guns from the kids' perspective? And the guns, outside of their utilitarian purpose, they meant a lot. There was a lot of symbolism, different kinds of symbolism attached to these material objects. And so his work really got me thinking in that direction. And so I was thinking, a lot of the things that he's uncovering could really apply to all of society, and so that's the connection that I wanted to make when I saw that essay, and then and it made me think about Black folklore and how important the gun is in a lot of Black oral tradition, like Stagger Lee, Frankie and Johnny, um, those old folk tales, um, and the representation of things like the bad man or the bad woman. They're still important, and there's a lot of modern um, depictions of these old characters from Black folklore, and you see it throughout blues music, and you see it in film, television, and hip hop. And the gun is this um, is a this recurring kind of powerful trope that that um, and also defining feature of those Black oral traditions, even starting in the Black exploitation era up to now. It is the gun that gets the attention, that is and it's there's so much symbolism there attached to it that it's kind of unlimited, in terms of what it can mean.
Absolutely. I remember uh, a Facebook discussion back when Facebook would have a discussion for like 5 to 10 days. It's really weird, but I remember one person. He was a friend of mine, very smart brother. His theory, and I say theory because I haven't read this to be proven, but it sounds like a good theory
Mhm.
that why Black folk became colonized and non-black by I guess Europeans, if you will, or by the Western world, is because the Western world had guns and the Black folk didn't. So then, when you think about this, the idea of the bad man and the stagger lees and these folklores of that come about during the many revolts and emancipations, I guess it would make sense. Um, the symbolism of the gun in the Black community, right?
Mhm, mhm. As a symbol of power, power and authority.
Right. So now I have to ask you this, right? Um, you went to an HBCU. How many HBCUs have folklore studies, ethnomusicology studies, anthropology studies as curriculums? Or at least that you're aware of then and now. It's a big question, but just to the best, I didn't mean to put that on you, but just based on,
Generally, I believe that folklore is a course that usually falls under English. And I know it was definitely on the books at North Carolina A&T. It's on the books here at Fayetteville State. And I would imagine that most literature departments that have African American studies as a concentration will have a folklore course. Uh, as far as actually getting a graduate degree specifically in folklore, I'm not sure that there is an HBCU that has it specifically as a graduate program. Um, and so I know Hampton was the very first. I'm not sure whether they still have that or not. But there are several universities that do have folklore studies, and of course, Indiana being the most famous, and um, Ohio State, and some others. Um,
well, I ask more in regard to the introduction of this on the academic level to Black students that seek historically Black universities for their education, at least their undergrad and first part of their graduate education. And with that being said, how much of the stuff that you learned was folklore? You had interest that you realized later that, hey, I was already doing this as a kid and had no idea this is what this is considered.
A lot of it. I was looking at the new. How much did I realize? Well, the characters that are present in the Norton Anthology of African American Literature, they do include some folklore, some folk tales. You know, you got the old ballads, the folk tales like the legends like Stagger Lee, and you know, I was aware that I knew that that was folklore. That's what I was introduced to as an African American lit student at North Carolina A&T. You know, the Norton Anthology, it does include a good deal of Black folklore. And, you know, it kind of explains that the Black folklore is there. It was all we had. And, you know, and it has grown and become integral part of African American culture that's never going to disappear. And so I knew that much. I knew that much just because of that one important text, the Norton Anthology of African American Literature by Henry Louis Gates and others, that introduced me to the world of Black folklore. But then when I got to Missouri, I started reading specific Black folklorists, you know, like Robert Johnson, you know, and some others that kind of helped me to see that it was a broad academic discipline and not just a few folk tales and songs. It's you know, and so there's a lot of serious scholarship, that I had to wait until grad school to be introduced to. You know, I think it should be talked about a lot more. That's why I think a lot more African American people need to write about their own traditions. I think it needs to be a part of the secondary grade school and secondary educations. You know, there's not a lot of it now, and so it definitely needs to be there. You know, there needs to be folklore courses for, you know, elementary age kids, high school kids, and a variety of folklore courses for undergraduates, you know, and so we don't see that. But, you know, if we had, you know, if we get more people interested, more people writing about it, you know, then the field's gonna grow and instead of shrink. So it's gonna grow.
Right.
It's gonna grow. So that's the goal moving forward, is to get more people involved.
So as we bring it to a wrap, what I would ask you is, if I don't know, a 15-year-old, a 27-year-old, a 60-year-old African American person approaches you like, I love what you're doing. What do I need to do so I can be able to play, you know, give my contributions to this field, whether it's academically, community wise, or independent?
That's a really good question. And so if you're an independent folklorist, that's really great. You know, I think for anybody, when you think about what we have now, the scholarship that is present now, available in a lot of different places, you have to think about what you're not seeing and how you can get that included into the picture. You know, and so if that's what you're doing, you know, whatever traditions that you're studying, whether it be material culture, whether it be oral tradition, or whether it be food ways, Is that particular tradition represented in the body of scholarship that's present? And if it's not, then of course you have to do what you should do, all that you can to make it more visible. Whether that's workshops, trying to put on workshops, whether that be blues workshops, whatever, foodways workshops, whatever workshops with things like public libraries, museums, and so and also writing about it, trying to contribute to the scholarship, whether it's a blog space, a website, or even an academic article. It's important to write about and document, and also, as you're doing, utilizing the social media networks, utilizing the social media networks to let people know about the particular tradition and why it's important, and to help, get other people involved in it. And of course, if you're an academic, then I think the most important thing that you can do is to continue to read and write about the tradition, and try to make contributions to the scholarship that's already there. And so I think that's really important in any way that you can.
I dig it. Brother Raymond, I appreciate your time and your works. And this is where you can get Proverb Masters. And I guess if anyone wants to interview him as well, I'll have, if he doesn't mind, I'll make sure I put his email in the body of the post. So you can interview about the book. But here's where you can get the book from. Okay, and we're going to continue pushing African American folklore work. And again, thank you, my brother.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
All right, good folk, you know what it is. We will see you next month with the following African American folklorists of the month. But until then, keep reading, keep history changing, keep documenting, keep evolving, and hug your mama.